Welcome to this month's episode of the Thought Leadership for Educators webinar, brought to you by EdMoxie. At EdMoxie, we believe that implementation is as important as vision, and that innovation does not need to be complicated, just different. My name is Jeff Mao, and I'll be your host. This month's topic is using augmented reality to integrate Black history across the curriculum, brought to you by 3D Bear. And we'll be speaking with educators Robin Williams and David Lockett, and 3D Bear's COO, Mitch Weisberg. Now, on to the show. Okay, thanks everybody for tuning in. Today's Thought Leadership for Educators webinar is using augmented reality to integrate Black history across the curriculum. And I've got a couple of terrific guests with me today. And we'll start off with just a quick introduction of our guests and also of our sponsor today. So 3D Bear is our sponsor, and they're a wonderful app that can help you with augmented reality, and there's a link here on the screen that you can use to find special pricing on 3D Bear. But let's get to our guests real quick and have them introduce themselves. So let me just start with Robin Williams. Robin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Robin Williams. Yes, that's actually my real name, Robin Williams. And I work in Orlando, Florida with the Florida Diagnostic and Learning Resource Systems State Discretionary Fund Project. I work as a professional developer here in Orlando, and I support 5 local counties in Central Florida, including Orange, Osceola, Seminole Lake, and Sumter counties. And in my role here, I work training teachers how to support behavior in the classroom, but also on the technology side, how to incorporate instructional and assistive technology into their classrooms.
Terrific, thank you. And David, you'd like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, my name is David Lockett. I'm a STEM teacher at Bach Academy in Lake Wales, Florida. I teach STEM, IT, and robotics. In our STEM classes, we employ a variety of different learning modalities. We love bring your own device. We're always looking for different ways that we can integrate 21st century learning for our middle school students. We want them to come away with a different type of learning. We want their learning to be technology focused. We want them to be 21st century learners who are not only digital citizens, but creators of content as well. Thank you.
Terrific. And Mitch?
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Mitch Weisberg. I'm the temporary COO of 3D Bear, which is a company that I fell in love with because it allows kids to learn while being creative. And I'm looking forward to learning along with all of you.
So real quick, and particularly for those of you who are new to this, let me just kind of give you a quick definition. This is just the Wikipedia definition of augmented reality. An interactive experience of real-world environment where the objects that reside in the real world are enhanced by computer-generated perceptual information, sometimes across multiple sensory modalities, including visual, auditory, haptic, somatosensory, and olfactory. That's a lot of words and a lot of syllables. You can see on the screen here, there's just a quick snapshot I took using 3D Bear. That's my, you can tell I'm a geek. So there's my autograph collection of the original cast of Star Trek. So I completed the entire collection about a year and a half ago. But I've added to it using 3D Bear some 3-dimensional models of various Star Trek ships floating there in space here in my office space. So that's just a kind of a quick, simple example of kind of inserting 3-dimensional computer-generated objects into a real-world space. But let me ask our panelists and our guests here a little bit from their perspective when they think about augmented reality. How would you kind of put that into more real-world thinking, and particularly in an education setting? Just some ideas about what is augmented reality to you. And maybe we'll start with Robin. Do you have any thoughts to add there? I'll just keep kind of going in order here on this. I'll get on the screen.
Yeah, when I think about using augmented reality or this app specifically in the classroom, I think about giving students multiple ways to show what they know. And it automatically makes me think about how we can fully actualize universal design for learning, which I talk a little bit about when we get to that point, and fully actualize those principles of giving students multiple ways to express what they know. And collaborate with others. There's a lot of research and just studies out showing how if we use augmented reality with our students, it actually increases their ability to communicate with each other, collaborate with each other, and even enhance their understanding of the content by giving them a different way to access and manipulate it.
Great. David, do you have any thoughts you want to add to that?
Just to piggyback off of it, when I think of augmented reality, I think of an interactive experience that all students can participate in. You're including, visual elements, you're including sensory elements. How can students use this exciting platform to not only create, but to, integrate, different objects into, real world learning, and a real world learning experience. You want to, not only make it multisensory, but you want to make it fun. You want to show students the benefit, of augmented reality, as well as, what can they take away from it to become creators and, students that are, enhanced, and students that, want to change something. So, augmented reality is definitely something to where, students can, they're empowered, they're taking an idea, and they're coming away with a different sense of learning.
Excellent. And Mitch, anything
I like
from
that.
your perspective?
Oh, go ahead, Robin.
I like that you said to be creators, and we're seeing such more of a push for having maker spaces for our students where they can be creative and they can just come up with their own ideas, and it's not so much teacher-directed instruction. We may give them a little bit of core content, but then they can just take it and run with it, and that's one of the things I love about it as well.
And I like the fact that we're using augmented reality, any of us can create a situation where other people know what we were thinking of. So I can look at a room and I can say, well, I wonder if what it would look like if this were in green, or if there were a pig in here, or if there was a Star Wars person in the room, and I can describe it, and people can kind of understand it. But somehow or other, if I can build it and then show it to people in a picture or a video, they get it much more quickly. So I think when we give kids that ability, we just let them soar.
Terrific. Yeah, and I think, just to add one more thought on this, I remember a number of years ago, Apple kind of started pushing out this notion of challenge-based learning, and they tried to define that as separate from project-based learning, because what they were kind of toying with was this idea that a lot of projects that come out are things where, they say, oh, design a habitat for Mars. And they'd say it's a terrific experience, but at the end of the day, the kids can't really make that because they're not on Mars and, whatever, and they don't have the construction tools to make something. And so they said challenge-based learning gives us an opportunity. They said, make a project where the outcome is actually doable, right? Something you can really create. And I think one of the interesting things with augmented reality is that it helps to bridge that gap. So you could say to somebody, hey, let's try and create a habitat for Mars. They could actually build something that they could then see and render in three-dimensional space in real world space, right? So they could kind of get a sense of what it might look like, what it might feel like, and actually have real people in the picture, so to speak, or in the video with them, and be able to talk through it and explain it. So I think it really does help on that creative side, and as Mitch said, allows you to create what it is that was in your head, and I think that's a lot of fun. So before we dive into this, I did want to just kind of toss up these two different pieces of information here. I think many of you who are out in our audience are probably familiar with these models. The SAMR model from Dr. Ruben Puentedora is a friend of mine, and worked with the model for many, many years. And I don't want to go too deep into what it is, because I'm guessing most of you do know it pretty well. And if you're not familiar with it, Google it. You'll find lots of stuff on it, or visit edmoxie.com on my website. I've got a couple blog articles about it. But really, just to kind of, as we dig through this and as we're thinking about some of the lesson plans and hearing from Robin and David, think about how it is that what they're describing, how would you classify that? Where does that fall on the SAMR scale or model? How is it a change in doing things with kids? And then moreover, if you may or may not be quite as familiar with a secondary piece that Ruben has been really talking a lot about lately, which is what he calls the EdTech Quintet, which are really not so much from the SAMR perspective of describing how a process is done and how it's different than what might have been done in the past. The EdTech Quintet talks really about what are the different ways that we actually use technology. So where you might be describing a new way of doing something, and you recognize that it's clearly a modification from the SAMR perspective. I've modified the process that kids are interacting with the content in some way, shape, or form. That's terrific to know that it's modification, but if we think about what are the different ways that we actually use technology, particularly in learning, he kind of recognized 5 core different ways that you might want to consider as you think about doing things, and you can use them in combination with each other, but here you can kind of see them: social, mobility, visualization, storytelling, and gaming, right? The idea that learning is social, and we often use technology to enable and facilitate communications, collaboration, sharing, right? Social learning. We also use technology to enable things like anytime, anyplace learning, right? Anytime, anywhere. And also I've heard Ruben talk about mobility from the perspective of tools are mobile in that they can now do more than one thing, right? So where you might have had in the old world, you had a plow and it plowed and that's all it did. But nowadays with, say, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet or something, it can do so many different things that the tool itself becomes mobile. From that perspective, it's a different twist on mobility. Visualization, of course, being able to see things differently. Obviously, augmented reality is a great example of visualization and making abstract things more tangible. Storytelling, I think we'll hear a lot about storytelling as well today, and everything we do in education for the most part is storytelling, whether we're reading a novel and then talking about that, or a history teacher is telling you about what happened in history, or you're explaining how you solved a math problem. You are telling a story, and how we tell those stories and how we enable kids to do that and be able to share what they know is really important. And then gaming, and how it is that we use things within the construct of a game. I was talking to Robin before when we were prepping for this webinar about gaming, and saying I hadn't quite come up with my own ideas yet of how I would use 3D Bear and augmented reality in a gaming scenario, but I'm sure that someone will figure it out and show me, and I will be very impressed and excited to see that. So look forward to someone doing that as well. So anyway, keep those in mind as we kind of are thinking about augmented reality, and how is it that I'm using it? Am I using it as a visualization tool? Am I using it for storytelling? And how does that change how I might have done that same curricular project in the past? Right? And so how does that lay up against the SAMR model? So given that as a background, I wanted to ask the panelists and our experts here just a little bit of kind of in general, before we dive into their lesson plans, some just general ideas of how is it that they see augmented reality getting used? What are some of the kind of large buckets that they see, some kind of general curricular ideas? And, maybe let me reverse the flow. Let me just start with Mitch if I can. And, Mitch, you want to just kind of share a couple thoughts, because you've seen a lot of different schools, a lot of different users who've been using augmented reality with kids. What are some of the things that you're seeing it being done?
Well, on say an early level in learning to read, the class may make an ABC video where kids are labeling different items. Oh, this begins with the letter A, this begins with the letter B, and then the teacher pulls them all together with the video, all the way up in, say, middle school or high school, where kids have been pulled together to redesign public spaces. How should this park be used by the community? Or we have this bus stop, but it's pretty decrepit now. How should we change this so it gets better use? To challenging kids to say, well, what are the things that you're most concerned about the world, what the world's going to be like when you grow up? And can you augment reality and create videos for us to show us as adults what we should be doing to prepare the world for what you think the world should be like? So those are some ideas for lessons.
Excellent. David, how about your thoughts?
Hey, yeah, I'd like to use it in a variety of different ways. We were doing some Martian experiments, and the students could create Martian landscapes. Students have used it to, build scenes to show appreciation around a holiday. They've augmented different ideas, to kind of integrate biome activities in. So there's kind of no limit to the different projects or the level of creativity that you can integrate with students in. Leveraging it in the classroom, you could use it to, reinforce across the curriculum, whether it's science, whether it's social studies. Your creativity knows no bounds. So that's what I always tell my students. And, when they're creating, and every day when they create and they show me something different, I'm amazed, because I always start the day off, what will you create? So with augmented reality, leverage it for creation. Leverage it as a creation tool.
Terrific. Robin, final thoughts on this one?
Final thoughts. Mitch and David have shared a lot of ideas. One thing that you mentioned earlier and that we are going to talk a little bit about in the lessons that I'm sharing is storytelling. Actually taking content, historical content and or literature, and allowing students to recreate scenes and reenact scenes within the augmented reality that they've created is one way to enhance those stories that they want to share with each other, and really have them work together with other students to be creative. And this is my interpretation of what this scene might look like. Come on, let's create it together, and then acting it out and creating that artifact to share with the class.
Terrific. Okay, so I'm going to turn things over here, and I'm still in control of the slides, so Robin will have to ask me to kind of advance things, but I'm going to let Robin share with you a couple lesson plans that she's prepared that really kind of get now from what we've just been discussing as kind of general ideas to a more specific lesson plan idea that, of course, we'll make available to you. Then you'll be able to use it yourself or modify it and use it in your own classroom. So Robin, I'm off to you.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So I was able to play around in 3D Bear some and look at some of the content that students are asked to learn, and came up with these two lesson plans. Civil rights, a when and where activity, which is very common within history. Students have to learn a whole bunch of facts in history and then memorize when something happened, where something happened, and then either share out a report or give a written report. And so I thought about how 3D Bear could be incorporated into doing that. And then also the history of Eatonville, the oldest Black town in the US, which is just outside of Orlando, where I'm located, and Zora Hurston, who's often referred to as Eatonville's daughter, famous literary figure of the Harlem Renaissance. So if you could advance to the next slide, Jeff. I mentioned earlier how one of the things that I love about 3D Bear is how it can really help us make sure that we are hitting these three principles of universal design for learning. One, providing multiple means of representation, giving students various ways of acquiring information and knowledge, and then creating resourceful and knowledgeable learners in the long run with the ways that they are accessing content and using the platform. The biggest way I think that 3D Bear does this is providing multiple means of action and expression, alternative ways for demonstrating what they know. So you give them the idea, and there is definitely a goal, but there is not much instruction on it. It has to be this, this, and that. Of course, there are rubrics that you would use and want to incorporate for the final project, but you're giving students yet another way for them to share what they know. And then finally, the third principle, multiple means of engagement, that goes back to that idea, Jeff, of challenge-based learning, offering challenges, increasing motivation for students, because we're really tapping into their interests so that they can feel like this is a purposeful and motivating lesson and or project that I want to participate in. So let's talk a little bit about the first lesson, which is the civil rights when and where activity on the next slide. And this is just a screenshot of what it looks like that you'll be able to access. I do have a bit.ly link to my website and a QR code that's going to come up, and you'll be able to access these lessons. But first, teachers will directly teach key figures, key times of the civil rights movement. I've included a slideshow presentation that's already created, and you can access it through the link in the document, the hyperlink, and add to it if you would like to add to it, but it's pretty extensive. Following that presentation, you would facilitate some discussion in the class with your students, and I've even given you some questions there. What were the implications of the legal and social challenges? And this lesson is directed towards grades 6 through 8. I'm sure you could extend it for high school as well. And another example of another question, what were the effects of the freedom rides? Just to get students to begin to start thinking about this. So then we would incorporate, thank you, Judy Nguyen. Then we would incorporate the use of 3D Bear, right? Because we've got all this content that we've given students. We've had them have time to discuss it. Now we want them to start enhancing what they know, demonstrating what they know with using the platform. So they would then either create or print out a map, because the app has to be used like on a flat surface, and then come up with one of these bullet points, use one of these bullet points: Thurgood Marshall joining the Supreme Court, when and where did the Montgomery bus boycott happen? And they would place that 3D item from the app onto the map. Also, the app enables them to add text to the map. So with the text, they would add the year that the event happened, create their artifact, and then they could either place themselves into the picture or into the video, and then narrate, giving us a little bit of a history presentation within that augmented reality that they've created. There's also a map that you can download through the lesson if you need to access one. But that was just one, and you could take this lesson and extend it many different ways. I would love to hear if any of you do use the lesson, how you've extended it, but that was just the first one. Does anyone have any comments or questions about this lesson before we go to what it may look like? Okay, Jeff, let's go to the next.
Well, let me just ask you one thing, or just kind of prompt you here. Is one of the cool things that I love about 3D Bear is that you can actually have more than one student interacting in the same kind of augmented reality space through the app. They can And so I could envision and you know, having, say, if you did have like a big floor map in your classroom or something, that more than one student could be placing their different pieces. So if one student was working on Thurgood Marshall, they could be doing something there, maybe in Washington, D.C., because that's what the Supreme Court is. And then someone else is placing their pieces in, you know, on Montgomery and in the right part of the, you know, on the map in Montgomery and so on and so forth. And so they can actually be interacting and collaborating on the same virtual space, so to speak. Well, it's virtual and it's real, right? So it's augmented. But that would be really an interesting way to also then have kids working together on these things, because then they could see each other's work through their own devices. The other thing that I think is interesting is that, you know, and we'll show you a quick example. I think it's on the next slide of just simply, you know, you can take objects, and as I showed you with like those Star Trek ships, and just kind of put them in space. I don't know that we have one really to show you clearly, because it's tough to do via webinar, but you can also do video. And so the kids could be talking and recording their voice. So part of the assignment could be that they're actually describing some of the information and telling that story out loud. So they may have to do some writing and scripting and that kind of stuff, which is also a great process for them. And then recording that, and then you've got a video artifact at the end too.
Yes, we do have one video artifact in the presentation. We're not sure if the audio will come through, but I'll speak to that as well. Mitch had a question, or a comment rather. Could students do other events in the civil rights movement? I just have 6 or 7 bulleted here, but of course, yeah, you could of course add to this list. I love the idea of multiple students working together at once to create an artifact. Let's go to the next slide and see what that one picture looks like. So here's just an example. It's the court in Thurgood Marshall. The gavel has been placed there. And then you could have the student either come into this reality and narrate a bit of the history that they've learned. They could reenact a scene or a speech that they may have heard from Thurgood Marshall, or even reenact the appointment to the Supreme Court. It could go a variety of ways. And that's the wonderful thing about the ability to be creative and not having children having to answer or share what they know in just one way. It's one of the things that I love.
Terrific. And Judy also made a comment, and I think it's a great one, and a question around having kids working together in small groups and being able to teach each other. And I think that's absolutely something that we see a lot of with 3D Bear and other, you know, in digital storytelling style projects, right? Where kids are doing the research around a variety of different pieces within a larger topic like this, civil rights movement, and then being able to share those back with each other, whether it's sharing live or because they've made videos and they watch each other's videos and then maybe have conversations about that.
Right. I just saw another comment from Regina about having students connect the information they're learning from the civil rights movement, but I couldn't read the rest of the comment. What was that?
So Regina said you could extend it by having students connect the civil rights movement to current events and do analysis or show change or lack of change over time. It's a terrific idea,
Yeah,
particularly bringing in data and other types of information.
Yes, that's excellent, especially for those older grades, comparing and contrasting from history to now. Okay, sounds similar to what Regina said. Very good. You guys are firing them up. I like that. Very good. The next lesson centers around Eatonville, Florida, and Zora Neale Hurston. And this lesson has kind of two options, two ways that you could go. And just as you all have already done, you will find many ways to extend this lesson. If you could click to the next slide, please. All of the standards the Common Core standards that these lessons address are also included in the lesson plans, and you'll see them when you download them. So what I did was I took a lot of free resources, particularly from PBS has a online free series for teachers all around Eatonville and the history of Eatonville. And so you would share that. That would be your part of the direct instruction with your students in discussion about Zora Neale Hurston and the history of Eatonville. And I like the videos because it gives students a glimpse into time as to what it looked like in Eatonville at the time, what kinds of clothes people wore, how people worked, what people did for leisure and or work. And then there's also some content that's included about Zora Neale Hurston specifically for direct instruction and her legacy, her life, how she became a writer, and some of the works that she contributed. So for this activity, 3D Dare activity, students would then have the opportunity to work in groups after some discussion to recreate any of the portions of the videos and add to them ideas about other things that they may have thought would be happening at the time. And I set a 2-minute presentation in the video, in the lesson plan, but you could do whatever length you want to do. Or you could have your students select from one of her most famous works, if you wanted to take more of a literary approach and not just history, have them read any of the excerpts from Their Eyes Are Watching God. I included some excerpts, some of the more descriptive ones that could be interpreted in a variety of ways, and have them use specifically Sketchfab and Thingiverse within the 3D Bear app, had more models of the items mentioned in some of the excerpts, and then prepare a video or sharing the scene, the description of the scene, and even reciting portions, maybe reading as if they were Zora Neale Hurston themselves. We have an example of a picture in the next slide, and there's a scene in the PBS video where boys are fishing and they're talking and laughing. So you could even have your students recreate that scene with more than one character. And what do you think those young men were talking about as they were fishing around the lake? You got to think about it. It's 1935. This is the first black town in Florida. What do you think that these 3 12-year-old boys could have been thinking about? And let your students go with that and recreate that scene in their mind based on what they learned, and then through the app recreate it.
Yeah, they couldn't have been thinking about girls, right?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. Any questions or comments around this app? I'd love to hear what you guys think about it, or read what you think about this lesson, excuse me. It speaks directly to the visualization, storytelling, and social aspects of the EdTech content that you mentioned, Jeff.
Terrific, terrific. Okay.
Yeah.
So
there's one more.
Yeah.
Here's the example. I also work with individuals with disabilities who have limited verbal language, and hopefully you can hear this, but what's happening here is this child, he is 20, he's a young man, he's not a child anymore, I've just worked with him for so long. He's 21 years old and has limited language, but he likes to, It's kind of hard to hear. He's saying tennis ball, bowling, tennis. And he placed these items with using the app in my phone in his living room. We're having a conversation about the sports that he likes the most. He does all of these things, plus he does track, basketball, and horseback riding as his sports. He's a pretty awesome person. And so this is what he wanted to place and talk to me about. And this makes me think about accessibility and really providing a way for people to better communicate with others even, and that motivation to want to communicate, because it's creative. It's a different platform to use. So thank you for sharing that, Joe.
Terrific. Yeah, there's so many different ways that that we can use augmented reality for different folks, whether it's, as you were explaining, kind of just direct instructional use in projects, to just pure communication and allowing someone to be able to express themselves a little bit more fully and efficiently.
Yes.
Terrific. So let me go on here. So here's the link that Robin shared, and all of these links and links to what we will see later from David will be available on our website at edmoxie.com, and I'll flash you that link at the end. So we'll archive all of this and make it available to you. So if you don't get this recorded just now, we'll get it back to you again. But this is a link that can get to Robin's lesson plans. So let me switch gears over to David. And David, would you like to share a little bit about the lesson plan that you prepared for the group?
Yes, so you're looking at a lesson plan that is under development. This is a project that I've worked with on my students for this year. They said, hey, we want to get a broader perspective of different figures in African American history. I work with a diverse group of students. So they pitch different ideas, and they say, hey, can we use 3D Bear to augment reality, integrate not only different inventions in, but integrate ourselves into these projects to not only build collaboration, but to build a better understanding of the how and the why. So a lot of our students have their own cell phones or own devices, so we wanted to integrate these ideas in to more or less have a living history museum. So the projects that you're going to see is a kind of an idea or collaboration between our middle school students and some of our elementary students. So they can actually come in and they can kind of file around the room, and they can actually integrate their ideas into a living history museum. So we'll look at that next slide. So, how could we do this? How could we highlight the accomplishments? How could we, visualize this creative thinking for all students to better understand, significant contributions from African American history? In integrating this different project, the Living History Museum is kind of a collection of the 3D visuals that you see in 3D Bear, whether they're Sketchfab creations, whether they're Thingiverse creations. We wanted to highlight different inventions and how our students could better understand why these contributions are significant, not only to our culture, but to history in itself. A lot of our students were amazed, the traffic light, touchstone telephone. They're amazed when they started doing their research and they looked at these accomplishments. So one way that we did this, we wanted our students to, of course, research, but we wanted them to look at the technology aspect as well. We wanted them to collaborate with each other. We wanted to build kind of that broad historical perspective so they could, not only create, but they could, take ownership of these projects. I know, a lot of times when we were looking at different contributions for Black History Month, there are different ways that you can do that, but integrating in the technology aspect was most important to my students. How could they, look at, these different contributions in a wide variety of thinking, and adding in that augmented reality aspect, was it provided curiosity. So if you look at that next slide, we have, of course, you're integrating curriculum, you're integrating content across the curriculum. You're integrating those CCSS, ELA literacy, and history and social studies perspectives as well. They're getting a good idea of supporting claims. they're getting a good idea, analyzing the impact that these different figures made in different regions over time. So, if you're looking for, different activities across the curriculum, this was a perfect way to do that. And I'm a STEM teacher. I teach STEM, IT, and robotics. So, our students have, a good idea of how this can reinforce learning across the curriculum. So, they're going to their reading class, they're in a writing class, they're in their social studies class, they're getting, a good combination of, affirming that historical perspective. Now, when we worked on this project, again, it's a work in art. Students, we added in things like rubrics. We added in, we want it to be as open-ended as possible, so they can, use that curiosity perspective. They can work with a partner on this. They can work in small groups. And I'm looking at one of the comments now. Linda said, I thought it'd be fun for students to create a museum of me to share major parts of their lives. So, that sharing aspect, that's, we want something that they can showcase. I'm an Apple teacher. I'm a one-to-one Apple teacher in an Apple school. So, all of our students have iPads, MacBooks, they can file around the room, they can use that technology, in a range of fields. It's not only focused, but, it's providing that ownership. You're producing, technology literate students as well. So if you look at that next slide, you have, I tried to involve students as much as possible on this. What key points, what aspects are you looking for? We want to look at, how is it authentic? What does your presentation include? Do you have any costumes? What are the elements of this display? How can you make your project, as intelligent as you can, as smart as you can? When we look at the expectations, we want it to be interactive. We love interactivity. So when students look at this, and other students can actually come and look at these displays, not only are they seeing the contributions, but can they interact with it? Younger students are seeing older students and they're saying, wow, a group of students worked on this particular project. They're collaborating. They're seeing how, especially, using these technologies can become a part of their everyday learning, not only from an early grade level, but across the grade levels. On the next slide, you'll see kind of a work in art. Those are a couple of my students there that they're using their iPhones to work on and augment their reality across the curriculum. I think one of them was working on a touchtone project there. So when students get to file around and they can see this, hey, these are the expectations. We want you to, integrate different types of learning. How can you make this especially important for all students? We had some students that were bilingual, and they included bilingual aspects of that as well. So, we didn't limit what we were doing. We're including biographies, we're including all of these different inventions. So, we can teach a new generation.
It's terrific. Yeah, as you were describing that, it reminded me of a conversation I had and an opportunity. I was very fortunate. I was in New York City last year for a New York City schools event, and I was able to meet some of the family members of a gentleman named Jerry Lawson. I'm curious if any of you are familiar with Jerry Lawson. So I'll bet some of your students would really love to learn more about Jerry Lawson. Jerry Lawson is the actual inventor of cartridge-based computer games. So he was the first guy to invent a computer console game that predated the Atari systems. This idea that you could have a game in a cartridge and plug it into a console machine, and then you would have a different game depending on which cartridge you put in it. So really, he is the person who created what now is a booming industry of Nintendos and PlayStations and all this stuff, right? But really an early thinker on that. Lived in New York City, and his family is still in New York City, and they were able to come to this event and kind of share a little bit about his history and some of the work that he did. And so I can see where being able to kind of do the research into different figures that go beyond what we normally see in a textbook, right? We always have the same names come at us in the textbook, but Jerry Lawson is not in the textbooks. But I think for today's kids, it's a very interesting figure, a very interesting person, and you can Google him. You'll find a Wikipedia page on him, and I'm sure other resources around the internet, and really give kids a chance to kind of find out who and what is out there, and what have people done that have really affected their lives, even though they don't realize it. So as you can see here, I've got Robin, David, and Mitch and their Twitter handles, so you can find them there. So that's one way to always reach them. Real last kind of toss to the panelists: where can folks find you in the real world, so to speak, next? I know that Robin, you were just sharing you're going to be at an event coming up and presenting. You want to just kind of quick round robin. So Robin, where are you going to be next if folks might find you in the real world?
Yeah, next I'm going to be at the ATIA conference here in Orlando next week. So I'm excited about that, and on a panel with others, playing a fun Family Feud game all about assistive technology and accessibility for our kiddos with that have some more needs that we need to better support.
Excellent. David, how about yourself? Are you going to be speaking or presenting at some events coming up?
Yes, I actually just finished FETC in Miami Beach. I believe last week we had a very large AR VR sandbox with Jamie Donnelly, and we had a very good turnout for that. TICA is coming up in Texas, February 3rd through 7th, and I will be in attendance as well there. So look for me at TICA. I'll make sure I'm tweeting out as much as I can each and every day. So always sharing my AR and VR experiences.
Awesome. And how about you, Mitch?
Well, I'll be at ASU GSV. I think that's going to be the end of March or April. And then I'll be at the COSIN event. And I know there's a library event coming up in February in Long Island, but I can't remember the date. But I'll be there as well.
Excellent. And if folks are looking for me, I will be at the CTO clinic in Bryce Canyon, Utah next week. And then later on, I will be at IDEA Illinois, at the IDEA Con in Illinois, speaking there as well. So that'll be coming up. I did see one question came in from Tyson asking about websites that curate AR offerings. So any thoughts on where you might...
Did you say websites that curate?
Excellent AR offerings.
I don't know of any, but I'm sure it's something that could be created and put in a Wakelet, which is excellent for curating ideas and links and resources. Do you know any, David? Mitch?
I'm going to put into, I'm hoping that this works, but if not, you can actually request access to it. But it's a Google Sheet that has different AR content. It's not actually mine, but it belongs to a person who works at 3D Bear. So anyhow, if you click the link and it doesn't work and it says request access, just click request access, and I'll let them know that I tweeted it out.
To the world, yes.
To the world, right.
Excellent. And I think also, on a kind of related, and it's built right into 3D Bear, but, and I think, David, you might have referenced this, Thingiverse and Sketchfab are also websites that have huge, enormous collections of three-dimensional objects that can be imported in to 3D Bear, and then many folks also use them in other 3D design software. But those are great places if you are looking for simply objects that kids might then place into your environment, right? So like I was looking for the Starship Enterprise and I found it in Sketchfab. So I didn't have to build it myself. Someone already created one. So
and Linda pointed out AR, VR in EDU, which is a hashtag on Twitter that's run by Jamie Donnelly, and she's very knowledgeable. She may be the most knowledgeable person in general about how AR and VR is used in education.
Excellent.
I agree.
And an all-around nice person.
Yeah. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the show notes, so this recording of this, as well as any and all links that we may have talked about or referenced, and links to the lesson plans that David and Robin shared, will be found at edmoxie.com/webinars, and you'll find the archive there, and just go into the archive, find this particular episode, click on it, and you'll get all of those various pieces and parts. You can find those there. And again, thank you to 3D Bear, who is our sponsor for this month's episode. And again, there's a bit.ly right there on this screen. If you want to follow that bit.ly, you can request a sales quote and get a special pricing because you are here watching and listening to us today. They're offering special pricing to you for being here today. So you can check that out. And of course, 3dbear.io is their website. You can learn more about the app itself. And the app itself is free to download, but to get the classroom license and other pieces that enable some features that really make it helpful in a classroom space, that's where the special pricing comes in. So again, thank you to 3D Bear. And then again, these links again, this webinar series is found at edmoxie.com/webinars. And then we also take an audio version and push it out via podcast. So thanks everyone for tuning in. And we'll be tweeting out again using the hashtag TL for Ed when we have our next month's episode lined up in topic, which we haven't quite nailed down, but we'll be getting it out pretty soon. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next month, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Robin. Thank you, David. Great ideas.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Have a good day, guys. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Mitch.
All right.
Visit edmoxie.com/webinars to learn more about and register for our next live webinar, as well as watch archived copies of past episodes or listen via podcast. Thought Leadership for Educators is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial License. Music provided by Joseph McDade, josephmcdade.com.